welcome. This program is produced and distributed by Minnesota Atheists. And if you're interested in our program or in our organization, our contact information will come up throughout the program. So please, if you're interested in us, we're interested in you, please do contact us. It's been about a year since we've done a program with the ACLU of Minnesota, the ACLU national affiliate. So we're checking in with Teresa Nelson, who's the legal counsel for the ACLU of Minnesota. And on this program, we're going to discuss how they are proactively working to protect your rights, your civil rights, and your civil liberties. The ACLU nationally has been active in this area since the early 1900s, and the ACLU of Minnesota has been doing the same since 1952. So on this program, we will talk about many of their different functions that they're doing, their legislative, their legal, and their public education. In the second half of the program, we'll talk about a case they just recently won, removing the 10 Commandments from the City Hall in Duluth, Minnesota. And Teresa Nelson, thank you again for being on our program.
It's great to be here.
Okay. Civil rights and civil liberties. When people, most people have no idea that you're there protecting their rights because they don't understand it till they're gone. Is that pretty much?
That's true. That's true. A lot of people don't realize what their constitutional rights are, and a lot of people think of us as just a crazy liberal extremist organization when actually our client is the Bill of Rights, and we are there to protect all people's constitutional rights under the U.S.
Political
Constitution.
ideology, liberal, conservative, pro-choice, anti-abortion, religious right, atheists. Eventually, they all become your client.
That's true. That is true.
And how long have you been with the ACLU of Minnesota?
I've been with the ACLU of Minnesota since 1997.
And you've helped defend many of these different clients.
I have, yeah. We've had conservative clients, we've had liberal clients, you know, and across the board.
Well, when it comes to free speech, we all know at some point or another, I mean, the claim is this is a big liberal media controlled, and the conservative speech may be just as trampled on as those of us who think that our liberal speech is trampled on.
That's true. We were amicus curiae, or friend of the court, in a case involving the Republican Party and some very conservative judicial candidates challenging the state's judicial code of conduct that infringed on their speech. So there's another situation where we were advocating on behalf of both the Ku Klux Klan and a group called Can the Klan in order for them to both get permits to rally at the state capitol. So
there's no discrimination when somebody's rights are infringed upon. The ACLU is there to protect them.
That's right.
And that's what we hope. And I know when I take a look, and recently your website is just like 100 times different than what it was just a few months ago. There's
That's
a
right.
tremendous amount of information, and it seems to be more. I always used to think of going to the Civil Liberties Union. If you were wronged, you would petition the Civil Liberties Union to file a lawsuit on your behalf. But in reality, you're doing more legislative and public education work to hopefully minimize lawsuits?
That's right. We've got 3 program areas, and the education program is focused on informing people about what their rights are so that they can advocate on their own behalf. We do a lot of informal advocacy. We find that a phone call or sometimes a letter is all that it takes to get
an
issue resolved. And our thinking is that when people understand what their rights are, they can first advocate on their own behalf and then turn to us when necessary, and we will certainly take it from there.
Well, a lot of times that direct citizen input has a tremendous amount of weight. Not everybody who is representing a government agency is trying to do something mischief. They sometimes are just plain uninformed.
That's true, yes. There's a lot of very well-meaning people out there who don't necessarily understand what the law requires.
And there's advocates for the other side just as much, so they can really get a full spectrum of views pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Well, on the public education, We have a mutual person that helps you on your cable television program,
That's
Jerry
right.
Rouser,
Jerry
who
Rouser.
was instrumental in keeping this program alive for many, many years. But now he produces a cable program for ACLU of Minnesota.
That's right. He's been doing the program and finished this spring his 100th episode. And
Really?
He's unfortunately no longer going to be doing the show because, you know, it's such an exhausting thing for him to do. And 100 was his goal.
Was his goal?
So that, you know, right now we're in the process of transitioning to a new program. But yeah, he's been
So
a wonderful resource for us.
Has it, are you going to be in a public access like we use here?
I think that's probably what we'll end up doing. Right now, this gave us an opportunity to go through our archives and pull up some really great programs that we did. We did an interview with Molly Ivins and some other programs, and we're rerunning them in the next few months.
And that was distributed pretty much around Minnesota.
Around Minnesota, yeah. I don't remember how many cable outlets we are sending out to, but it's
And again,
in every corner of the
you
state.
had a variety of different points of view that were on the program.
Yeah, the idea was to have a civic dialogue and to be as informative as possible about issues. And so we've had people from the state of Minnesota, Secretary of State Kiffmeyer, Don Gemberling from the Department of Administration talks about data practices issues. We've had the head of the Human Rights Commission a couple times talking about human rights issues, discrimination issues.
You know, you had a variety of state church separation experts that were
Oh,
on
yeah.
over the time, too,
Yep,
from many
absolutely.
different points of view.
Yep,
So-
and we hope we will continue to do that.
Excellent.
Right now, we're just in a transition. So
Well, Jerry helped us here for a long time, and he had other goals, which was to go help the Civil Liberties Union. So we transitioned and were able to accomplish it. So
great.
But if somebody's in a community in Minnesota and they do not yet have your program, can they contact you?
Absolutely, absolutely. We do need somebody local in order to sponsor it. They just have to request that it be put on, really, and we should be able to take care of the rest.
Now, one thing that you've taken up, I know over the years I've worked with the Civil Liberties Union on different legislative, but it was usually a pretty lean lobbying effort. But in the last couple of years, you've been doing a lot more direct lobbying at the state legislature.
We've been trying to do more. We've done quite a bit of reproductive freedom lobbying issues, and we've been working with Sue Rockney, who is a great resource to deal with those issues.
15 years ago, she was one of the first guests we had on this program.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Okay.
we've been
So
doing
you
this,
know
I
Sue.
think, for 15 years.
Oh, okay.
And she had no trouble whatsoever coming on, and she hasn't been doing many public appearances lately, but she's a tremendous resource.
Absolutely. So she worked with us, and we have some volunteers who've helped us track legislation, try and get the word out about issues that are happening. Every now and then I will testify at a committee hearing on various issues. The big issues this session were, well, the biggest issue was the proposed anti-gay marriage amendment. So that was, we were pretty active.
Minnesota Atheists. I know I have August Berkshire from Minnesota Atheists.
Yep,
He was sitting
I
there
saw
waiting
August.
in line to testify.
Yep, we both were sitting at those hearings.
In our issue is a narrow perspective. Religions are trying to define who should and shouldn't get married. So that, from our perspective, well, as a human rights issue, but that was the perspective we took. If religions are going to try and define it, then it's no longer a secular operation. But your perspective would have been a little broader.
Our perspective was broader, that this is, an unprecedented attempt to write discrimination into the Constitution. And, the other thing that we pointed out is that there are some religious groups who do bless same-sex marriages, and this would infringe on their religious freedom.
We had a Unitarian minister on a little while ago, and they have a controversy as to whether, if it's outlawed, whether they would do heterosexual marriages. Would it be ethical to do one group and not the other group?
Okay.
so the Unitarians
tough issue.
have an internal conflict
Yeah.
because they were some of the first people to do religious marriages.
Mhm.
30 years ago, they were performing religious marriages for same-sex couples.
Boy, I was not aware of that.
Well, that's what our history told us. So the Unitarians, we've always gotten along well with them. You have somebody who's worked incredibly hard in legislative,
Yep.
because this is from Minnesota. If people do not know, it's a biennium. It's a 2-year session, and there are a tremendous volume of bills. This is I'm not sure how many pages long, 13 pages long. And these are just bills concerned with issues from the ACLU of Minnesota.
Right, those are bills, and actually that's a pared down list of
was
bills
longer.
that caught our eye. And so, yeah, those are bills that we tried to keep track of in this last session. And
Well, the volunteer
we
doing
had a
this
volunteer,
is
Carolyn Jackson. She did a fabulous job on it,
tremendous.
really helpful.
Because sometimes you cannot always tell by the title actually what's in it. And it's really
Right.
tedious to look at all these
Yeah.
bills.
To look at them and then go through and figure out where they are in the process, what's
You have
going to
a
happen.
numbering code. If somebody went to your website, they
That's
could look
right.
this up.
Yep.
And then there's a numbering code that gives the various different categories that different people
The
might be
issues,
interested
yep.
in. There's two that particularly, we look at state-church separation. Abortion and reproductive rights, I guess there's three, and then the GLBT issue is what we primarily go. But this has 18 different categories.
Yep.
So if somebody's looking to keep track of bills related to civil rights and civil liberties, this is a good resource. So keep that volunteer happy.
We will do that. We'll keep her in business.
And on reproductive rights, I mean, abstinence, that's rational-based sex ed and abstinence-based is still the big hot issue.
Yeah, every session there are a flurry of bills tightening up the language, trying to tighten up the state's language about how teachers teach sex education. And there's a very strong push to require abstinence-only based education, which
That's
studies have
primarily
shown
what-
doesn't work, number one, and much of the curriculum resources out there are so tainted and so biased and full of misinformation.
What
that,
is Minnesota law now on sex education? Is it not basically abstinence-based?
Well, it's abstinence-based, which means that other comprehensive education comes in, but abstinence-only teaches that the only way to prevent STDs, pregnancy, is abstinence until marriage.
But there's reality.
And abstinence only excludes the teaching about birth control and other comprehensive sex education. So that would significantly.
And in Minnesota, on the abortion, it did pass that in Minnesota law, it now says life begins at conception. Did that bill pass?
I don't think so.
It was in the abortion language. I know it passed the House. Well, we know it always passes the House.
Yeah, I would have to double check on that.
So maybe it did in the Senate get defeated. But this is a big issue. Life begins at conception. It's passed in different states, that actual language. And of course, that's a religious point of view. It's not a scientific point of view. The scientific
Right.
point of view does not agree on when life actually begins.
Right.
And if the consequences, of course, long term, if you say life begins at conception, then certain reproductive options are off the table.
That's true.
So, if you're a teenager watching the program, this involves your rights in the future, so you might want to pay attention. On the abortion, the ACLU nationally, this hasn't really worked, I don't think, out of Minnesota very much, but nationally the ACLU has been very active on reproductive rights.
That's
one of the
right.
most active groups out there.
That's right. The ACLU has a Reproductive Freedom Project that works, tries to work in all of the states to address reproductive freedom issues, whether it be dealing with abstinence-only education programs, conscience clauses that serve to deny women access to reproductive health care.
Is that the big issue now about pharmacists?
That pharmacists and hospitals as well. There are, for example, the Plan B emergency contraception is often not available in hospitals because those hospitals have a religious objection to providing it.
In many county hospitals now were formerly religious hospitals, but some of the covenants have transferred. And they try, and this is something they try to, and people really do not understand when they lose their county hospital, and St. Mary's Hospital, which might be a wonderful place, assumes being the county hospital, but it was a Catholic hospital before, that some of those Catholic covenants they insist on transferring along with, which might be a prohibition for any abortion referrals, even discussion,
exactly.
or even general reproductive options.
Yep, that's a huge issue as hospitals are merging with religious-based hospitals and are required to sign on to those religious principles. That results in a denial of access to necessary reproductive health care.
And if it's a county, particularly a rural county, that could mean access might be a day's drive or better.
That's true, yes.
It's not just drive down from, Sleepy Eye to New Ulm and to the town next door. It might be drive from southern Minnesota to the Twin Cities.
Right.
And I know they even talk about financially, Hennepin County Medical Center has always had financial troubles, and that's an option they talk about, selling it.
Yeah.
And that is probably the biggest county hospital in the state.
I would venture to guess, yes.
There was a ruling, as we're taping this in September of 2004, there was another ruling, a second ruling on overturning the ban on late-term abortion method, and this was an ACLU national project.
That's right. There's several cases going on with a number of different groups, and the ACLU Reproductive Freedom Project is involved in one of them. And the court said that this you cannot ban a specific procedure unless there's an exception for a woman's health. And this ban did not include the exception, and so the court found it unconstitutional.
Well, the judge was particularly critical of Congress because Congress did not take in all the medical testimony.
That's true. Congress...
they took in the emotional testimony, but not all of the medical expertise.
Right.
In the medical... You would think that since it's a medical procedure, the doctors would have something to say about it, and the researchers.
Right, and ultimately Congress made a medical finding that is not supported by the consensus of medical research. So,
so the ACLU has now prevented quack medicine in a way from actually being legislated.
That's right.
We should talk, we've got about 10 minutes, about the Ten Commandments case. Of course, this is an issue close to the heart of atheists, but in reality, the Ten Commandments is not about whether, as an atheist, I object to it. People all say, well, it's loaded. The atheists, we know they do not, but your clients were a wide, you had 10 clients?
We had 10 clients, and our clients were atheists, agnostics, Christians, Buddhists, so they represented a pretty wide range of religious beliefs. And our position was not that the Ten Commandments is bad. Nobody says that they should never be visible by anybody. If it's on private property, that's your property. Do with it what you want. You have a free speech right to do that. But our position is that the government should not be in a position where they are promoting one belief over another, or religion over non-religion.
What seemed to be in a lot of the articles, and this is a pile of just a collection of articles, and it goes on and on. This is a very hot emotional issue when it comes out. And the center of a lot of the objections seem to be, well, what is the real harm? It's not really. It's been there since 1957, and it's not in a real visible. Why does it really harm somebody to have one specific religious option endorsed by the government over any other? That it didn't really. It wasn't. If you walked by it, it wasn't going to directly harm you. Is there a harm by allowing one religious point of view, or let's say an atheist point of view?
Well, there absolutely is a harm because it sends a subtle message to people. It sends a message that if you don't believe in these Ten Commandments, if you have another religious belief, or maybe you don't believe in this version of the Ten Commandments, you are less favored by us, the city government, the people that you elected.
And there is a key. There's different versions of it.
That's right.
There's not just one general version that all Christianity or all of Judaism agree to.
That's right.
There's variations.
That's right. And in this country, our Constitution and our form of government is made up of two important principles. One is that we're governed by the people through our democratically elected representatives. And number two, that our Bill of Rights and the Constitution protects the minority from their rights being infringed by the majority. And so even if 99% of people in the city of Duluth wanted the commandments there, the Constitution is there to protect that 1% from having their rights infringed. So it's not, the First Amendment is not up to a majority vote. And if it was, we wouldn't need the First Amendment because we wouldn't care.
It always kind of, people think of the First Amendment as, before the First Amendment was written, there was preferential amendments, and they tolerated different points of view. So there were tolerance amendments, which assumes that there's a majority that says, well, okay, we think it's okay if you kind of have that point of view, but we can take it away from you. That's what tolerance basically means.
Right.
What is the First Amendment, the free exercise, the religious freedom, what does that actually mean? Does that mean equalization or tolerance?
I think it means equalization. It means everybody gets treated equally and in a neutral manner by the government. If you look at the two religion clauses, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or the free exercise thereof, they're a little bit in conflict. And that conflict, I think, serves to create a balance that protects everybody's religious liberty.
Well, in fact, they say there is no statement about the wall of separation, but indeed, this is a very small rendering of a much larger context that Jefferson and Madison worked on.
True.
And they defeated, in fact, preferential amendments for the Christian religion in the state of Virginia and before the Bill of Rights. I think if I remember right, it was before the Congress they tried to do a preferential. But in Virginia, they defeated a very specific preferential amendment for the Christian religion.
Yeah, that's, I think when you look at the context, it's true. The words separation of church and state do not appear in the Constitution, but the two religion clauses serve to do that, to
keep the government
to require a separation.
out of the free exercise, and not, because they always say, well, it just means no one church, but it's more religious preference.
It is.
Well, there was one point, because I know one thing I enjoyed about doing this program is because there's another Steve Peterson out there in Minnesota. Hard to believe, isn't it?
I met him.
Yeah, well, it's an SON,
Yeah,
though. Just, but I kept thinking, well, somebody has to defend the SEN Steve Petersons who actually go for secular government. And he started a petition drive to save the Ten Commandments.
That's right, he did.
And he seemed like he was quite a great organizer. And he wanted the citizens to vote.
That's right. He wanted it to be put to a vote about whether or not to keep the commandments. And actually, they wanted to transfer the commandments and the property underneath it to St. Louis County so that St. Louis County would defend a lawsuit.
But the part about transferring property has been covered in other courts.
That's right.
It's kind of a sham to have this little corner owned by XYZ,
Yep.
Whether it be another government entity or an individual group.
That's right. There was a case in La Crosse dealing with that very issue, and the federal court said, no, that's not going to fly. That's not an answer. You've got to get rid of this monument.
Yeah, and that was in a city park. They were going to give a little 10-by-10 area in the middle of the city park. But his big goal, he tried to intervene in the court case also.
He did.
What is the grounds for intervening in a court case?
Well, you have to have an actual interest in the outcome of the case. Generally, it's a property interest, but it could be other interests.
So this is
And
government property.
this is
He's
government
just one
property.
other citizen.
Yeah. The court said that his interest was not cognizable because he hadn't gotten enough signatures yet even. There was no election. It was merely a political disagreement with the city's decision about how to dispose of the lawsuit.
And in
that's-
actuality, if he would have succeeded and had the citizens vote, in the long run it would have cost it, because even one of the city council members was a lawyer, and the city lawyer said, this basically is not defendable. We
yeah,
will not win.
that's right.
And eventually they would have had to pay legal fees. Pretty
They would have had to
standard
pay
that legal fees
Yep,
for your lawyers would have been paid.
yep.
And I know there was a big issue in there that even the city attorney had mentioned that if there's a violation, they have to pay a penalty.
Well, they would have to pay our attorney's fees.
Mhm.
We weren't seeking damages from the city, and in the settlement agreement, we did not seek fees or damages or anything. But if we would have had to continue to litigate, we would have sought those attorney's fees.
And that's just part of the process
Right.
of how our system works, and the losing side generally pays, whether it's in private litigation or civil litigation like this.
Yep.
But the city attorney made I thought, a pretty good point in specifically saying that the Civil Liberties Union does not want to cost the taxpayers money, just
Right.
wants to solve this issue.
Exactly.
And
We had tried for about 3 months to get the city to act without filing a case. They, for whatever reason,
Well, it was
decided not to respond to our requests.
But eventually, the city attorney must have suggested that they had to do something.
Well, we actually had to file the case, and
Oh,
then they
okay.
took action and made a decision. So,
So no, it was a split vote all the way through, but eventually the political majority said they went through a long process and tried every possible option short of settling, and then eventually said we have to
that's
settle.
right. Yep.
Well, we're down to just a little under a minute left, so we'll leave lots of options on the table for discussions in the future. And if people are interested in the ACLU of Minnesota, either in supporting or helping out, they can call the phone number or go to the
Go
website.
to the website. Yep.
And that's aclu-mn.org.
Yep.
And you can always connect up through our website, too. We would be glad to put you in touch with them, particularly if you have an issue of concern about your individual rights. We're interested in helping protect them also. Thank you very much for coming again.
Thank you.
And if you're interested in Minnesota Atheists, we have a newsletter that's produced 10 times a year. You can contact us, and we'll be glad to respond. Thank you. Until next time, goodbye.